Hello there, welcome back to the show. In today's episode, we are going to be chatting about what it looks like to lead from the stage, to lead from the front of the room with vulnerability. And this can seem really, really scary, but stick with me because there's actually a lot of power in this, and I have seen it time and time and time again. And if you want to crack open in the best way the hearts of those that are in the room, then vulnerability is a must. Now, this episode is actually brought to you by a super amazing and exciting opportunity that is coming down the pike, and you are not going to want to miss it if you want to develop. If you are a budding speaker and you want to develop your $5,000 to $10,000 keynote, and you want to learn how to be an impactful speaker and facilitator that moves the room, and you want to learn how to pitch yourself to other event hosts, then you're going to definitely want to be on the early bird, on the wait list, on the info list for what we have coming. So all you have to do is text the word speaker to 833-231-8098, and you will start to get information when we open up this next really exciting announcement coming up soon. Okay, so now back to vulnerability and using it as a superpower within your keynote speech. I will share what this doesn't look like, as well as how to be able to use this really, really powerfully. Now, in my career as a speaker, which I have been speaking and training and facilitating for going on 15 years now, and I'm not saying I've arrived by any means, but I'm saying that I have learned a lot of what not to do. I have learned what to do. I have been trained by some of the top speakers and trainers in the industry, and have also then received a lot of feedback from a lot of people saying that I'm one of the best that they've ever seen. So it's really, really exciting. And I've put in the reps too. I know if you guys have heard one of my past episodes about what it looks like to just put in the reps and to be messy enough, or to be willing to be doing something long enough to get better at it. Like when I was a volleyball player, I had to put in the reps and over and over and over, and in the gym and in the weight room to become, an all-American player and to go off to Europe to play professionally. And so I had to put in the reps. And so it's the same with a speaking career. If you want to become a really impactful speaker, we got to put in the reps. But here's one of the reps that I really want you to pay attention to. And it's this vulnerability piece. Because here's the thing, when it comes to, if you have a microphone in your hand, I remember hearing a long time ago that those with the microphones make the money, right? And there's this really interesting concept, or this really interesting psychological thing that happens, is that when you are up on stage or you're leading from the front of the room and you have this microphone in hand, there actually is a chasm, this imaginary chasm, this imaginary gap that happens between a speaker and the audience. And one of your jobs as a speaker, if you want to be a great speaker, if you want to be a world-class speaker, is to actually close the gap and the chasm that's between you and the audience. And John Maxwell, he does a beautiful job at this. He's one of my mentors, and he is actually I'm actually a John Maxwell Leadership Certified Coach, from back in the day as well. And he does such a beautiful job at this. In really connecting and closing the gap. And one of the first things that he does when he steps on stage is he says, "Hi, I'm John, and I'm your friend." Instead of this whole on stage and I'm the guru and you need to listen to me and I got my ish together and I know what I'm talking about, so you just need to listen to me and do what I say type of a vibe, he shows up he says, "Hi, my name's John and I'm your friend." And he's sits down in a chair and he gets comfy, and there that psychologically there is this beautiful invitation, oh, we're just chilling on the couch together and I'm sitting with my friend John, and there that gap gets closed a lot more. And so I want you to kind of think about ways that if you are leading from the front of the room, or if you are a budding or a growing, aspiring speaker, and you want to begin to close that gap, how can we do that? And it tends to be like, it's this interesting truth that lives in the tension of showing up, obviously, like as the expert that you are, and showing up, like you don't show up on sweatpants and like what you're like what you would wear like on your Saturday morning hanging out with your kids. Like you want to show up as an expert and give off. I always love to like get a fun outfit that challenges me and expands me in who I am and who I'm becoming and who I'm showing up to be. Because there is a psychology in that concept. It's called the red shoe effect, which that's another story for another day. But there is this truth that lives in the tension of showing up as the expert to build rapport and trust, as well as closing the gap of what happens between the audience and the speaker and the butts in the seats and the one that's on stage. And vulnerability is a really, really beautiful way to do this. Vulnerability, when it actually starts and when you lead with vulnerability from the front of the room, and actually, like I mentioned, it cracks open the hearts that are in the room in order to then create more vulnerability and deeper connection within the room. Now, you have to understand that when it comes to vulnerability, it can feel really exposed. It can feel like really vulnerable, and it can feel like you're being exposed, and it can feel like you're putting your heart on the table and you're like wearing your heart on your sleeve. When it comes to vulnerability, it actually is one of our greatest strengths that we can share, and one of the biggest gifts that we can give as a leader is vulnerability. And I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like. So I just had the opportunity to share the stage with Dean Graciosi, which if you don't know who he is one of Tony Robbins. Him and Tony Robbins, they own 6 businesses together. He is a multiple 7-figure, probably 8 or 9-figure. I mean, Tony Robbins is like a billionaire. So I'm sure Dean Graciosi has way more money than I'm even giving him credit for. But he is well renowned, has sold millions of books, and is an incredible business strategist. He's amazing in real estate. He leads masterminds. If you aren't following him, definitely do so. But I just had the opportunity of sharing the stage with him, and was hired by Chris and Lori Harder to speak and facilitate at one of their incredible high-end events for networkers, for really beautiful businesses and business leaders and people that are moving and shaking in the business world. And one of the goals that Chris and Lori had for their event was to really deepen connection and trust in the room. Like the entire goal of the dinner series of what they're doing with these events is creating this really tight-knit community. And so it was my job as a hired facilitator to come in and to crack open the room, to make the connections, and to really set the environment for this to happen. It's almost like being the curator of a greenhouse. If you think about a greenhouse, it's right. And a gardener, they have this greenhouse, and they take these plants and they bring them into this growth-rich environment, but they have to set the environment first in order for these plants to grow. And so, same thing for me as a speaker and a facilitator. Chris and Lori's goal for this entire event is literally deep and rich connection, so that people can meet their business partners, so that people can make, connections for years and years and years to come. And so that it's this incredible, really well-connected network. And so my job as a speaker and facilitator was to obviously facilitate that. And knowing the psychology behind connection, I was like, okay, we have to be able to insert vulnerability and create this space for vulnerability to happen, because I don't know about you, but for me, I trust people, but I don't necessarily trust someone at a deeper level unless they have gone through some stuff and come out on the other side victorious, and come out on the other side with some Maybe they're like kind of walking with a limp. Maybe they've got some scratches and bruises, but you know what? They have come out on the other side stronger. They have come out on the other side like with a story. They have come out on the other side with lessons that they have learned. And so we created this, I was able to facilitate this rich environment, an invitation into better conversation for deep trust and deep vulnerability to be established. But that doesn't happen without it being modeled from the front of the room first. And so I kind of prefaced like what I just kind of did where, I kind of led into this concept of vulnerability, led into this concept of trust, kind of set the stage, gave some context, and then it used my story and gave an example of what this looks like. And I had to lead from the front of the room when it came to vulnerability. And I was able to share my story, and I've shared it multiple times here on the show. It's in my book, Meant for More, Igniting Your Purpose in a World That Tries to Dim Your Light. So grab a copy of that if you haven't grabbed a copy of it. But I was able to really share my story of when my husband and I, when we journeyed through loss, and we lost a child a number of years ago, and it wasn't on our radar, and it wasn't in the plan, and it really threw me for a loop. And I remember sitting on the bathroom floor. The tile was cold. I was weeping. I had tears streaming down my face. I could taste the salty tears. And it was like the ugly cry. And I was asking the big questions of why me? Why this? Why this dream? Why our family? I didn't understand. And I remember sitting there on the cold tile in the bathroom floor, feeling so alone, feeling like my body was broken, like I couldn't keep this baby safe, like buried in shame. And for me, my higher power, God, came and met me and sat with me in my isolation, came and sat with me, and it felt like I was wrapped in a warm blanket, and I didn't feel alone. Felt like I had met a deep and sweet and cherished and sacred friend. And God didn't give me a 7-step to get out of my whatever. He actually gave me the lessons, like the beautiful healing lessons and healing journey. Gosh, that I wasn't broken, that there was actually nothing wrong with me. And as I journeyed through that loss and through that grief and began to heal, and we went to grief counseling and EMDR and began to develop a community and began to find the power in sharing my story, I found that I wasn't actually alone, that a lot of women have journeyed through loss. And I actually found the power in sharing my story. And I actually found the beautiful, unique perspective that not one of us is a mistake. You listening to this right here, right now. It's not a mistake that you're here on planet Earth at this exact time in all of history. There are millions of pieces and parts that have to come together for life to be sustained. And it's not a mistake that you're here, and it's not a mistake that I'm here. And so the gift that I was given out of that journey of loss, coming out victorious on the other side, is actually that I can look at you and I can see you and I can see the other people around me as the miracles and the gifts that they are. And I can see the gold inside of you, and I can challenge you, and I can draw that out in you. I can see beyond the dirt, and I can see beyond the junk, and I can help you find that piece of gold and the worth that is inside, and help you draw that out and make something beautiful with it. So that is part of my story that I was able to lead with vulnerability and with the power and the lesson that I had learned on the other side in this keynote speech, in this facilitation that I was doing for that event. And if I hadn't led with one of my dark nights of the soul, if I hadn't led with one of the things that exposes me, then it wouldn't have cracked open the room. Like, there were tears and people were moved, and they were like, I had so many people come up to me. I probably had 30 people come up to me afterwards and say that this was one of the best facilitation and speakers like speaking things that they had ever seen and ever experienced, that it was so rich and so deep, and thank you for sharing. And they were moved to tears. And then as I then facilitated and invited them into like exposing themselves and being vulnerable and sharing like their dark nights of the soul and their I like to call like we call it the rocks on the table. Right, the rocks that they had picked up from rock bottom, the things that they had picked up from rock bottom to then be able to build something with on the other side of it. They were invited into rich and deep vulnerability, which is actually really a show of strength and grit. And that, man, like they've gone through some stuff, and it actually creates really, really deep and rich connection. And it was leading with vulnerability from the front of the room. And so if you're a speaker and you're learning how to do this, there's ways to craft your message. There's obviously stories that you have gone through and things that you have gone through that are going to impact those around you and scoop up the room, right? This is what we call actually going into the dip, because there's this chasm that you on the stage and the people in the audience, that there's a gap there, and you actually scoop people up in that dip. You scoop people up in that dark night of the soul. You scoop people up in the places that you have failed and fumbled and where you don't have it all together, because that's actually where you meet them, because that's probably either where they are or where they have been. And so there is obviously an art to then scooping up the room and saying, gosh, if you have ever felt like you have been buried in shame, or that you were broken, or that you didn't have what it took, or that you felt so alone and you didn't know what you were doing, right? There's a way to scoop up people. They can find themselves in your story. And then we bring them on a journey out of that onto the other side of victory. And we bring them on a journey into then inviting them into sharing their strengths and into sharing their spaces of vulnerability. Gosh, there's so much impact and so much that can happen in a room like that. And so my encouragement for you is, if you are leading from the front of the room, and I tend to find that I remember when I was not as secure in my identity, or maybe I didn't quite have some of my stories, because there's a difference in you having your story versus your story having you. And I love even the way Jen Gottlieb, she puts it, like sharing your scars, not your open wounds, right? So we want to make sure that you're sharing stories like as an overcomer from a place of victory, not from a place that you're like still in the middle of the mess and you're still sorting through it. So coming from a place where you have your story, it doesn't have you, and really sorting through some of those, learning how to be a really good storyteller so that you aren't verbal vomiting a bunch of different details that aren't needed, but you're really establishing not only credibility but vulnerability. Now, I remember when I was a speaker who was a lot less experienced and wasn't as secure in what I was doing as a speaker, I kind of felt like I had to like almost overcompensate in sharing my expertise, and I'm this expert, and I'm this, like, you need to listen to me. I almost had to like convince people compared to like leading with things like vulnerability. And some of that comes from reps, and some of that comes from feedback, and some of that comes from teaching and training, and even outside perspective of, oh, okay, like those are extra fluffy details that we don't need in your story, and that's not going to necessarily matter to your audience. Or how can we tweak and revamp this thing to really get it to land in a powerful way and scoop up your audience in that dip? So there definitely is strategy behind it. But if you are leading from the front of the room, if you're speaking, if this is actually something that you really want to intentionally, right? Like you don't want to dabble in it. Like, oh yeah, I've just put on my website, I'm a speaker now, so I'm just gonna wait for people to invite me and to speak. Like that's a great start if that's where you're at. But I actually am talking to those of you who are actually like willing to put in the reps, that you have been actually putting in the reps. You don't necessarily struggle a ton with imposter syndrome. I mean, maybe a little bit, but you actually know that you're called to be a voice like I do and like I am. Like there's an undergird how do I say it? It's like this, like you know it's a call. Like you don't want to do it just because it looks cool and fancy on the outside. Like you actually are willing to put in the, like to be in the mess, to put in the works, to put in the reps, because you actually know that it's a call on your life and that I'm actually speaking to you. And you are the one that I want you to text me the word speaker to 833-231-8098, because I am going to be opening up a major impact certified speaker program coming up here soon. And it's only for those who know they are called to be a voice. This isn't for the ones that, oh, like that it looks cool to have a microphone and look at me. It's like, no, like you have gone through some stuff and you know, like that the call that's on your life, that one of the purposes that's on your life is to be a voice. And you are ready and willing to not live from a circumstance, but to live from a call, then you are the one that belongs on this text list, and you are the one that is meant to get the insider info and the invitation into this speaker certification. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And if you're still growing in this and maybe you're finding that you are still dabbling and still trying to figure out like, oh, maybe I want to speak, or maybe I'm new at this, or you don't quite have that conviction yet, then I want to encourage you, like even what I have been sharing this entire episode, is to start to lead with vulnerability and to start to figure out what stories you have that can invite people into like your dip and your chasm, to then close the gap of you on stage or you leading from the front of the room and those that are in the audience. All right. So that's what we have for you today. I hope this helps. Lead from vulnerability. It is such a beautiful place to be. If you need some other experts to kind of learn about vulnerability, Brene Brown, she's a beautiful expert in vulnerability. Check out some of her TED Talks, read some of her books, Dare to Lead, some fun stuff like that. She's a really great example of what this looks like as well. And yeah, that's what I got for you today. So if you love this episode, I would love to shoot me a message on Instagram. My personal one is Charity Majors, or you can head over to the Business and Bubbly Instagram and shoot me a message on that one. But I would love to hear if you are leading from vulnerability, if you want to learn how to lead from vulnerability. This is a great place to start. And if you are wanting to be on kind of the insider info list of this major impact certified speaker program, then text me at 833-231-8098 and stay tuned for details. All right, my friend, as always, cheers to your success, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the show. I hope it brought some value and some fun into your business and life. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast, and even share the episode with a fellow business bestie who you know will love it. It helps us continue to attract top-level guests and reach more and more women who are on their journey in business just like you. Remember that when money gets in the hands of good women, great things happen. Cheers to your success.